Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Grand Teton Music Festival Forum for our first gathering. My name is Jerry Hou. I will be our guide for today and for some upcoming episodes. I'm coming to you from Houston, Texas. It's a cloudy day, uh, pretty warm here, and I'm sitting here in my office at the Shepherd School of Music at Rice University. And I thought perhaps we can spend our session getting to know each other. And I would also just tell you a little bit more about myself and about what I do so that you have a better idea about where I'm coming from. And so I currently work here at the Shepherd School of Music at Rice, where I am the Associate Conductor. And here I work with the orchestra, the chamber orchestra, the opera, and the contemporary music ensemble. And I'm associated with the Grand Teton Music Festival, working as their associate conductor. And I have done that for 3 summers, and I'm hoping to have a chance to come back this summer, especially given our circumstances, but we'll wait and see. I just want to tell you a little bit about my path to becoming a conductor. Um, it's sort of been a long road. It's not something that I had planned when I was young. I know there are a lot of people who wanted to become a conductor at a very young age or had a very specific incident in their concert or something that they saw that made them decide right then and there they had to be a conductor. It wasn't quite that case for me. I grew up in a small town in Arkansas, so it was about 30,000 people, and I didn't really do much music until I didn't start an instrument until I was in the 9th grade. So I started off as a trombonist. And so I didn't even really know that one could make a living as a musician. So when I started college, I started off as an engineer. And I went to, this was in Illinois, and I went to a concert in Chicago by the Chicago Symphony. And I was absolutely mesmerized. And it made me decide, this is what I wanted to do for a living. And so I switched majors, I switched schools, and I ended up started being very serious about the trombone and pursuing a living as a musician. And so after pursuing my master's, which I actually did here at Rice, I went off to Europe and to study and ended up working there. And I worked as a performer doing a lot of contemporary music. I did a lot of music in opera houses. But at some point, I ended up having an injury to my lips, and I couldn't play anymore. But I knew that I still wanted to keep going as a musician. So I looked around for opportunities and what else I could do. And conducting had been something that had always fascinated me, being an instrumentalist who had played in orchestras and seeing, different conductors, different styles of working, and also the different responses that conductors could get from an orchestra. And so I took some classes, and I eventually went back to school at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, and I got my doctorate in conducting. And from there, I came here to Houston to join the faculty here at the Shepherd School of Music. And besides my work here, as I mentioned, I spend the summers at the Grand Teton Music Festival, but I also have other associations with Wyoming, a state that I love and the people I love as well. I spent a year working in Casper as an artistic advisor for the Wyoming Symphony. And this past January, I was up in Gillette leading the All-State Orchestra. So I feel like I have some experience with all of you there in Wyoming. But when I tell people what I do for a living, that I'm a conductor, it usually elicits a variety of responses. Now, on one extreme, people ask me, "Oh, are you associated with trains?" Because they think about a train conductor and something like that. But there's also the other extreme is sort of there's this certain mystique about conducting. I think it's because because we all have a baton, and when people see it, they think about it as a magic wand, as in Harry Potter or something. And I can tell you, I'll pull out my baton here, my favorite baton, right here, that it is very much just a piece of wood. There's no, phoenix tail feather or anything that's in the shaft. But I'll tell you a little bit more about conducting in just a little bit. So, what does a conductor actually do? I mean, it can look very, you see somebody standing in front of this group of musicians with a baton, with a wand, waving their arms, but they're making no sound, and you hear this music coming from the orchestra. And it seems pretty amazing. But I think if I'll break it down and let you in on some secrets about what's going on. So what is conducting? Conducting is, to put it very simply, is nonverbal communication. So I'm trying to communicate ideas to the musicians, and I'm listening to their responses to. It's like a dialogue, a conversation that you might have with a friend. So, kind of ideas am I trying to conduct? Well, if you break it down, there's some very objective things that you can talk about with conducting. So this is something I'm sure you face at home whenever you're all together in rehearsal, whether it's band or orchestra. You're in class and you see your band director, orchestra director there waving their arms. And, I think about this and I realize that none of us have ever had a class on how to follow a conductor. It's just something like you show up in band or you show up in orchestra and then you see this person waving their arms and you're expected to sort of follow along. And so I will sort of give you an idea about what the conductor is trying to communicate. So if you break down these gestures that a conductor is making, I mean, you see them waving their arms, you'll see them gesticulating. They're communicating some basic ideas. So the first thing that they're trying to communicate to you as a conductor is tempo. So if you think about whatever piece of music that you're playing, it's always at a certain tempo. Let's pick one out of the air, say 100 beats per minute. So if you think about Beethoven's Second Symphony, the exposition is at 100 beats per minute. So you would feel, so they're just trying to help us keep a sense of tempo so that we're all unified on how fast we should be playing our notes. So the first thing that we have here is tempo. And then after tempo, the next thing that they will try to convey to you is meter. So whether the music is in 2, so basically when it's in 2, you have 1, 2, 1, 2. If it's in 3, 1, 2, 3. If it's in 4, you have 1, 2, 3, 4. And so these are sort of the first two things that you'll have, tempo, meter. After that, you'll have dynamics. So you'll see that sometimes there will be really big gestures, and sometimes you'll see very small gestures. So generally with the gestures, the size equals dynamics, meaning small will equal soft and big will equal loud. So you'll see whenever you're in rehearsal, different sizes of gestures trying to reinforce whatever you're playing, whether it's a soft line or a loud line or somewhere in between. So there's a huge range of motion that you can have for these gestures. And then the next thing that we're trying to communicate as conductors is articulation and style. So if the music is very pointed, you'll see sort of the gestures to be very articulate and such. And very articulate, very separated maybe, or it can be very heavy. You'll see heavier gestures, or you can see smoother gestures for something that's more legato. So these are sort of the very objective things that one is trying to communicate as a conductor. So whenever you're next time, hopefully soon, when you're together rehearsing again, really watch carefully what your director is doing with when they're conducting. Now, most likely, when they're conducting, they'll have a baton. So what is the purpose of the baton? It's really just simply to help amplify the movements of the hand. So you notice if I move my hand like this, it's a very small motion. But if I add the baton, I move my hand the same, the motion becomes a lot bigger. So it's supposed to help just with a little bit of clarity with what people are seeing, especially those who are in the back of the orchestra or the back of the band, a little further away. It helps them have something to really focus on with when they're playing their instruments. So that's basically it. So, I mean, if you wanted to think about conducting, it's very basically, if you want to try this at home, if you want to conduct in one, it's just 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's great if you're practicing your instrument, you want to take a break instead of just playing on your instrument, just to practice conducting the music and singing the music. It's a great way to internalize good rhythm, good sense of pitch. So give that a try with whatever piece that you're doing at home. Now, so far we've only talked about what the right hand is doing, or some people conduct with the left hand. Our maestro at the Grand Teton Music Festival, Donald Runnicles, is a lefty. So the hand that doesn't have the baton, it's trying to show, we'll say, is more subjective ideas about the music. You can have talking about, you can help show increases in dynamic, decreases. That's a little bit more objective, but you can start showing things such as mood or character. You want a certain atmosphere in the music. That's sort of where the left hand starts coming in. But in essence, it's really about not just the hands, but also the face and the body. So it's very much a whole package of non-verbal communication. Now, I was showing you sort of these gestures that one has. It's really interesting with conducting is that you can see people give the same gestures and you'll get completely different responses. It's simply a sort of a fascinating, maybe more magical aspect of conducting. It has to deal with the more human aspect. So sort of everybody has a different personality, everybody has a different charisma, everybody has different energy, and also physically, people are all built very differently. And it's just sort of a human connection. There are people that you meet that have that you know you'll be really great friends with, people you meet that you'll know you'll be acquaintances, people that will just, not have a big impact in your life. Somehow you know immediately just sort of the energy between people. And it's the same way with conducting. Sometimes you'll have great chemistry with someone, and sometimes it doesn't work. And so it's interesting to see. But there's also different styles of conducting, and I think Mike is going to put up a video to follow on YouTube that I would like you to watch. And it has 4 different conductors, all conducting a piece I think that you'll recognize very quickly. So just take a few seconds to watch on this video, 15-20 seconds of each conductor, but just look at the different styles, look at the different responses and the different sounds that you'll get from these conductors. Enjoy. So you got to see 4 different conductors. These are sort of the more older, very eminent conductors, Bernstein, Karajan, Seiji Ozawa, and Marius Janssens. You notice that very different styles conducting, and also very different responses from the orchestra. So if you have any questions right now, please go ahead and type them in. I'll start getting to questions as we progress through here. And just sort of, I see some people sending their greetings. Hello to Tim and 67th Army Band, Wheatland Armory. Shannon, hello. So please type in your questions. I'm happy to answer whatever you have so far. But also, I will go ahead and talk a little bit more about the other aspect of what a conductor does. So far we have talked about the physical aspect, the actual moving of the arms. So what we don't get to see is what happens outside of the performance. So a lot of time, a conductor's life is actually spent alone, and you're spending time learning music. So if you're a violinist, or if you play horn or trumpet or flute, you get a chance to practice your music on your instrument at home. Unfortunately, for a conductor, um, you don't get a chance to practice on your instrument. You have to imagine what it's going to be like. So, but you spend a lot of time with the music, getting to know the music. So, so what you do is you spend time with the score. So here I have just Dvorak symphonies, and if I were to say I have an upcoming performance of this, I would basically start just looking through the score and trying to absorb the sounds. Now, it's a lot of information on the page. You'll see multiple lines. You have flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons, trumpets, horns, trombones, percussion, tuba, and the strings for this piece. And so I would just basically start looking through, just trying to get the sound in my head of each line as it's sort of put together. Now, when I first started conducting, it was pretty overwhelming, looking at all these lines, trying to read multiple lines, as I was just used to reading one line. But as with any kind of reading, it gets easier. It gets easier as you sort of become practiced at knowing where your eyes should go and taking in more information at the same time. So when I'm looking at a score, I'm trying to just first get an idea of what the sound is from the composer, and just reading through the score, I would leaf through and just sort of hear it in my head. And then I would start, as I got more and more familiar with a piece, I would start analyzing a score. So I always ask my students here at Rice, sort of, what is the difference between knowing a piece of music and understanding a piece of music? And so, man, that's a great question. I mean, it's like, if you learn the notes, does that mean you sort of means you know the piece in a sense? But what does it mean to understand it? Just more of what the notes mean, just than the notes itself. Part of it is sort of, it's sort of if you were to read a poem or a text, you're understanding, you start looking at the words, you become familiar with the words, and you start putting together in sort of the phrasing of the words. So, for example, sometimes if there are words that you don't know, you just sort of sound it out phonetically. So you're looking at the words and you're sort of sounding out phonetically, but not understanding the meaning of the words. So you have to dig deeper and thinking about how the words are grouped together, and the sort of the sentences, the paragraphs, the larger idea that's being communicated by the author. And it's the same thing whenever you're looking at a piece of music. You're looking at I start usually by looking at, say, a movement of a symphony, and then I look at the different sections. And then within the sections, I look at the phrases, and within the phrases, I look at the different measures. Within the measures, I look at the notes themselves. So I always start with something big, go to something small, then I reverse the process and go back to big. So if you're associated with something you're reading, you look at the letters, they come together to form words, which form sentences, which form paragraphs, which forms chapters, which forms the book that you're reading. So it's all these ideas. And they always ask, people often ask about how long it takes to learn a piece of music. And as a general rule, I think it takes about an hour of study per minute of music. So this symphony, Dvorak's 8th Symphony, it's about 38 minutes long. So it would, the first time to learn something like this, would take about 38 hours. So you would think it's a lot of time to spend, but to really know a piece of music intimately is sort of it takes time, just like trying to form relationships with with people. Just a few questions here coming in. What do I love the most about the Grand Teton Music Festival? It's hard to put that into just one thing. Without a doubt, I love the music, and of course, associated with the music is the people there. We have wonderful, wonderful musicians, and the friendliest bunch of people I know, and seeing them come together and make this glorious music. But part of it is also just the setting of the music festival, being there, the Tetons, and seeing the mountains, and so it's all sort of a perfect alchemy of music, people, and nature. So it's a very special place. It holds a dear place in my heart, and it's sort of feel very fortunate to have spent time there. It's definitely been a transformative experience for me being associated with a music festival. There's a question right now about score study. Do you mark the score often? I've noticed some conductors mark in colors, almost choreograph their performance, while some seem more organic and mark very little. This is from Shannon. That's a great question, Shannon. And for me, the idea for score study is to internalize the music. So it depends on the difficulty of music, whether it's something that everybody knows or something that is a little bit newer to everyone. So whether they need a lot of help with entrances or something that we have performed together often. So that's part of it. Just depends on the score. For me, I'm a person who likes to see a lot of architecture in music. So I will really mark out the sort of the sections and the phrasing, just because that makes me feel have a better understanding of how a piece is put together, and the phrasing, and then the actual choreography of it. I don't really do much for that. If it's a more contemporary piece of music with some meter changes or mixed meters, I will definitely mark that in, because those tend to go by quicker, or just things that are going to help me while I'm conducting, to help the musicians, ways that I can help the musicians. Otherwise, I'm just trying to absorb the music, and sort of have a very crystal idea of it in my mind. But that's a great question. But leading on to rehearsal, so sort of once you sort of spent your time studying the piece of music, you go to rehearsal to sort of unify the musical message. So especially when you're working with these great musicians, such as what we have at the music festival, there's a lot of people have experience playing this music already. And so they will have their own ideas from studying themselves or from their previous performances. And so it's as we start the rehearsal process, people sort of are presenting their ideas. I'm presenting an idea, and we sort of work, listen, respond to each other, and unify our various ideas so that it's a very direct approach to the music. What does it mean by unification? It can be something as simple as how a note is articulated, the length of a note, how we're going to shape a phrase, where the loudest part of a movement is going to be, special colors or atmosphere that we're trying to capture in the music. So that's sort of what the rehearsal process is, so that we all are, in essence, feeling the music the same way. As Leonard Bernstein, who you saw in the video a little earlier, puts it so eloquently, it's all about how one feels about the music. That's probably more important than anything else, so that we have the same feeling about the music, and then we can sort of play it together. Same feeling of rhythm, of phrasing, style, and that's sort of the essence of what we're trying to do in rehearsal. And so that's the sort of beauty of live music making. So we spend our rehearsal process unifying, and then we present it to an audience, which adds another factor to this process. And sort of our end goal is to present this musical idea to an audience, and to share our feelings about the music and see if we can elicit the same feelings from the audience. These feelings from that we get from sound, as as a famous poet put, is so where words end, music begins. So it's a lot of things about expressing ideas that we can't in words, and just sort of sharing that experience together. I guess this is a good time to see if there's any questions right now. Let's see. Brennan has a question about how did I learn to coach and conduct instruments other than the trombone? It's just having friends that you who played a lot the other instruments, and I would just sort of ask them, how their instruments worked, how to what was difficult, what was simple, what are tricky things for them, and spending a lot of time watching rehearsals. I spent a lot of time just going to rehearsals and just watching rehearsals of all levels, from junior high, high school, college, professional, and just seeing how conductors rehearsed. It's one of the hardest things to do as a conductor, is really knowing how to rehearse effectively. Any other questions here? Marking the score. But yes, internalizing music is definitely the best way to, is the most important way. You sort of, it's sort of like becoming a character if in a play. You take the lines and they're sort of what a character would say, but you create the psyche, the history of a character, and somehow you become the character through the lines. And so it reflects, it affects the intonation of your voice, how you would say certain things, what feelings you might have. And so it's sort of very much becoming the music in a sense. So I just wanted to give you an idea, sort of an overview about what I do and what a conductor does. And of course, it's sort of one of the few roles in a few roles of presenting an orchestra concert. Of course, the people who are making the sound is the musicians, which are obviously you at home with the instruments that you're playing. So there's obviously, there's the 4 different groups: the strings, the winds, the brass, and the percussion. But even within each of these groups, we have different roles. So for example, there's always somebody who's sort of a section leader, the concertmaster, principal second violin, or first flute, first trumpet. And within each of these sort of section leaders, they should be communicating with each other. And then each instrument group, they're communicating with the other instrumental groups. So it's sort of, in a sense, just large-scale chamber music. It's not so much about everybody trying to watch a conductor and following that, because I think everybody will always say that they're always with a conductor. But it's more about how to feel the music the same way, and that's sort of a lot with how we breathe together as a group, eye contact, and sort of how we listen and hear. That's probably the most important thing. And depending on where you're sitting in the orchestra, you will hear different things. And so one of the things that is important for the conductor is being there in the center and the front, is trying to help everyone listen to each other, to know what to listen for. Especially when you have the score, you have a better idea of what groups of instruments are playing with each other. So trying to help unite people to know that, oh, the violins are playing with the clarinet and the bassoon there, or just different groups are playing together, so they know to listen to each other. So just helping facilitate better communication. One thing I also wanted to talk about today briefly is sort of just different career paths that one can take, besides being a conductor or playing in an orchestra or playing in a band. There's, of course, you can be a chamber musician, you can be a soloist, teacher. And I think in this day and age, you have to be able to do everything. Everything is very important to our lives in music. And before I continue, I just wanted to ask a few questions for you to answer. Who is your favorite composer? And what is your favorite piece of music? So please let me know. I'm curious to see uh, what you're listening to, what really drives you. But going back to different career paths, is that in today's world, we have to be able to do a little bit of everything. So what does that mean for all of us? It means becoming the best musician we possibly can be. So spending time on your instrument. It means being able to communicate clearly, to teach ideas, to teach others. Somewhere, no matter what you're doing as a musician, teaching is always going to be a very important part. And because our goal is to make music an important part of everyone's lives. It's something that humanizes us. It's something that connects us. It makes us better listeners. These skills that music is teaching all of us: perseverance, dedication, teamwork, discipline, listening to each other. These are skills that apply not only to music, but also to everything that people do, whatever job that you may be in, whether as a scientist or a lawyer or diplomat, anything that you do. These are skills that we need, and it's skills sometimes we see are missing today, and hopefully we will make sure that they stay strong. But music is, I think, a key part to our lives, and it's something that I know for me has made a big difference in my life. When I was growing up in Arkansas, it sort of made me realize that I wasn't alone, meaning that these composers who lived, 10, 30, 50, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, I could feel through the music that they were experiencing the same emotions in life that I was experiencing. And so it's something that connected us not only in the present day, but connects us to the past, and hopefully it will connect us to others in the future. I just wanted to draw this to a close. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join me this morning for our first forum, first gathering here on the GTMF Music Forum. It's been a pleasure to share a little bit with you about conducting, a little bit about music, and I know that in the future we will be talking about some other topics. Next week, I think we're going to take on the mighty composer Ludwig van Beethoven. It's his 250th anniversary. And so we'll be talking about Beethoven and sharing some of his music. And I know that we're hoping in the future we'll have some musicians from the GTMF orchestra present to you about their instruments as well. And so I want to thank you once again for being with us, and want you to be safe, stay healthy, and in the time quarantine, try to stay sane as well, and spend your time listening to music. We have a lot of free time right now, and just enjoy this time we have. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.